Thank you. All right, thank you so much. Really happy to be here today. I'm freaking out. This is terrifying to me. So we talk a lot about how important it is to hire for diversity. Crystal gave an excellent talk on this earlier today. As an industry, this is something that we're starting to talk about more and more. We're doing a pretty poor job at it. But what we don't often talk about is once we've added even a little bit of diversity to our teams, how do we support, retain, and advance them? And before I get into the meat of my talk, I made kind of a last-minute decision to shuffle some slides around, which is always a really good idea to do in the morning, just so that we're all on the same page about what we mean when we talk about developing diverse teams. So I want to start with this chart. This is from the Women in the Workplace study that McKinsey did with Lean In. This came out last year. And this is the corporate leadership pipeline. So this is not tech-specific. You might imagine how the numbers would shift in tech. You might actually look around this room at all of the lovely managers and tech leads that we have here and notice something about the diversity of our leadership. At the entry level, things don't look quite so bleak. But as we start to traverse up to the C-suite, we see the numbers dwindle for everybody but white men, and most notably for women. And this is what we're fighting when we talk about developing diverse teams. We want to see equitable advancement across this pipeline. Today, you'll mostly hear me speak about gender diversity and racial diversity. There are many other types of diversity that I care about, things like sexuality, age, disability. Depending on where you're from and what the demographics are in your country, diversity might bring different things to mind. But hopefully, you'll leave here with some thoughts on what you can do to advance people who are underrepresented in your leadership ranks. So, let's start with what we're not going to talk about. We're not going to talk about why diverse teams perform better. There's loads of research on this topic. Either you believe that research or you don't. We're not going to talk about why building diverse teams is the right thing to do. I think what you're going to see in this talk is that it takes intention and it takes work, and so you have to want to do it. And we're also not going to talk about how to make your existing team more diverse, at least not directly. But this is what we are going to cover. And I think you'll find that when you create trust, and when you can retain and advance people of all backgrounds, and when you start to understand the pitfalls and the hurdles that people who are underrepresented face in our industry, that we're going to feel better about the work that we do, our teams are going to perform better. And sort of related to this last point up here, hiring for diversity becomes much easier when you have the reputation as a leader, as somebody who advances underrepresented people. We talk a lot about this diversity pipeline. Nothing really fixes your pipeline problem like clearing up the sewage backup at the end. So let's start with an uncomfortable truth. We have to immediately grant trust to those we lead. I don't think anybody here would disagree with that. We've hired somebody, they've passed our interview process. There's no reason for us to think that they can't do their job. And yet, we have to assume that we have not earned their trust as leaders. And what I want you to think about is when somebody's experience in tech is as the other, when they've experienced sexism or racism, when they're the target of unconscious or conscious bias, when they've been told that they weren't a culture fit as a means of dismissing them, when they've rarely, if ever in their life, walked into a company and felt like they identified with somebody in the organization who has the power and authority to advance them, we have real work to do as leaders to earn their trust. And it's not easy, but we can put in the work. And as somebody who has worked for the same person on and off for about the last decade, I've thought a lot about why it is that I choose to stick with what I know. And for me, it comes down to three things: safety, feedback, and advocacy. So let's start by talking about safety. Most of you are probably familiar with Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And way near the bottom, above our basic needs of water, food, and Wi-Fi, we have to feel physically and psychologically safe at work before we can begin to do our best work. According to a recent study, the Tech Leavers study that just came out this year by the Kapor Center for Social Impact, underrepresented groups are leaving the tech industry in droves due to unfairness and mistreatment. Women are being sexually harassed. LGBT employees are being bullied. Men and women of color, specifically Black and Latinx men and women, face stereotyping. Women of color are being passed up for promotions. If our teammates cannot feel basic safety on their teams, then they're not going to stay on them, and they're not going to stay in tech either. So the most basic thing that we can do as leaders is to create an environment where employees feel free to be themselves. And this is kind of a silly slide, but I start by modeling this behavior myself. And so I am my weird, authentic self at work. This is the Beyonce shrine that's on my desk. All hail the queen. This is my dog, Fife Dog. And Uplift is the name of our diversity and inclusion initiatives at Lyft. So these are the things that are important to me. And I've found that when I offer up authenticity, I get authenticity in return. And in my one-on-ones, I've seen that when I regularly offer up personal information, that starts to form a connection between me and my direct reports. And it makes it easier for us to talk when things get hard. But knowing a little bit about someone is not enough. We also need to understand who people are from a cultural perspective. And this is something that I don't see acknowledged often enough. But cultural awareness is part of your job. When we lead people who are not like us, we can't claim ignorance to their concerns. We have to be sensitive and aware of the things that are happening in our companies and our communities and our world that might cause certain groups of people to not advocate for themselves, or to not conform to things that come easy to us, or to maybe suffer a sudden or gradual loss in productivity. And we're not going to be expert social anthropologists, not overnight, but we should have a general awareness around things like gender pronouns, religious practices, mental health concerns. We should understand stereotypes and how those affect how our coworkers approach each other and their work. And we can learn about these things on our own, and we have to learn about these things on our own. We can't expect our direct reports to educate us. That's not their job. We need to diversify our Twitter follows. We need to diversify the blogs that we read. We can and should diversify our own personal networks, and that includes hanging out with people who are not in tech. And my pro tip is that if your company has employee resource groups for women, for Black employees, for LGBT, for parents, that you as a leader should be in every single one of these groups. You don't have to participate. I'm sure your support would be welcome. But this is a good opportunity for you to learn about what's happening in your company that are affecting these groups. So, learning about them is one thing, but talking about it is really, really hard. We're told not to talk about religion. We're told not to talk about politics. But what happens when religion bleeds into work? What happens when our identity has been politicized and it affects how we come in and do work? If you're paying attention at all to what's been happening in the US in the last couple of years, you'll know that police brutality is top of mind. And I know from talking to my friends that when a Black person is murdered by the police, that it becomes very difficult for some people to come in and focus on work when they're worried about their safety or the safety of their families. And this is something that I want my team to know that they can talk about with me if this is something that they're struggling with. But it feels really weird as a white woman to be bringing this up. And I did it anyway, because I know I should. And it was a tough conversation to have. And then the incredible Laura Hogan, who you're going to hear from later today, wrote this excellent blog post called Managing in Terrible Times. I'll provide the link to that. And this is sort of the framework that it follows. This is astonishingly close to the conversation that I had with my teammate. I said, I just want to check in. There are things that I'm reading in our employee resource group. This is where being in these groups is really useful. I want you to know that it's fine to talk about it with me. It's also okay not to. It's not my intention to intrude or to assume how you feel in this situation. But just let me know if there's anything I can do to support you. And this created a really good opportunity for us to connect. And it also meant that this person later came to me when other things were bothering them, and we could have an actual talk about their productivity. And then it was something that I could use if some of their teammates started to notice their drop in productivity as well. Of course, be aware that these conversations can lead you where you don't want to go. You should not get into political debates. There have been times where my own tweets have outed my political views, and I've had somebody try to come engage me in a debate, and in that case, I just say, this isn't a appropriate conversation for us to have, but just let you know that I support you regardless, and if you need support at work, then come talk to me about that. So, of course, if we're going to have risky conversations, we're going to screw up. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have these conversations. It means we have to learn how to respond. So what happens if you've maybe crossed a line? I'm sure you didn't mean it, right? You're supportive. You might think of yourself as an ally. I'm going to share the secret with you today. You're very lucky. You say you're sorry. And that's it. And that's how you apologize. And you don't get defensive. Your intentions don't absolve you of harm. And you don't expect them to educate you. You go do the work, you read, and you do better. What happens if there's a more maybe serious violation, or if one of your teammates says something that offends one of your other teammates? You always want to allow the person who suffered harm to determine the type and the magnitude of the response. And what I mean by this is, first of all, you don't overreact. If somebody says something that's maybe a little out of line on my team, and my response is to make a big deal out of it and get HR involved, I haven't created safety on my team. I've created a spectacle. And I've perhaps drawn more attention to somebody's otherness than they would have liked. Instead, I'll say, that's not cool, we'll move on, and I'll follow up with people individually afterwards. It might be something that I document for HR purposes, but it's not something that I'm necessarily going to pursue unless that's what they need. And I also want to tell you, don't underreact either. So if there's really a serious violation, your priority, number one priority, is the safety of the person who is harmed. And you don't do this at their professional expense. If somebody's been harassed, you don't move them off of the team that they enjoy and the work that they enjoy, but you look to create safety for them. And you first believe their experiences as well. Okay, so we talked about safety. Just to recap, we create personal connections. We educate ourselves on cultural issues. We don't expect somebody to do that for us. We make space for risky conversations. We learn how to apologize without being defensive. And we respond appropriately to safety violations. Okay, so now we're going to talk about feedback. And mercifully, Erica Carlson gave an excellent talk on this yesterday. Hopefully you all saw it. I'm really glad it's been covered, especially because I entirely cut out the part about receiving feedback, but that is one of the most important things, is learning how to receive feedback without becoming defensive. That's how you create trust and make it okay for your direct reports to talk to you about some of these tough conversations. But I do want to talk for a minute about constructive or difficult feedback. So how many people here would say that they rarely ever hesitate to give difficult feedback to a direct report or teammate? Be honest, it's cool. I know there's some ask culture in here. So, according to this McKinsey study, 2/3 of managers say that they don't hesitate to give difficult feedback. And yet, most employees say that they rarely get difficult feedback. So we have a mismatch here. Moreover, women are more than 20% less likely to say that their manager often gives them difficult feedback. And why is that? Well, Erica already talked about this, but it's fear, right? We fear being hurtful, being disliked, being biased. We fear the tears. And this is one of the things that I hear most often from other managers. How many people here have given feedback to a teammate or a direct report and had them cry? Yeah, a lot of us, right? And I have as well, men and women, in fact, more men than women. And I've also cried in my own feedback discussions. I'm a little bit of a crier. But as managers of humans, we have to get over our fear of human emotions. And many men have asked me, oh my God, I have to give her this feedback. What am I going to do if she cries? And first of all, that's a hurtful stereotype. So you shouldn't say it out loud. But I'm going to give you the secret again. If a man or a woman cries during a feedback discussion, this is what you do. You ask if they're okay. You treat them like a human being. You ask if they need a minute, but you don't let your fears stop you from giving feedback in this situation. Giving feedback when it sucks is your job. And ultimately, the most difficult feedback is the feedback that we need to hear the most. And we do a disservice to every group that's underrepresented in leadership ranks when we let our fears prevent us from doing what we know we need to do. So we need to buck up and give feedback. And a way to make it easier is to add structure to your feedback. And this is going to look very, very familiar. And I think this is important because it helps us follow the same patterns that we follow for everybody. And the way that I approach this gives me a lot of opportunities to check myself for bias in my feedback. So I'm going to kind of speed through these because Erica covered them so well. But for every pattern of behavior I want to change, I use the following. First, an observation, factual, indisputable. If you'll remember, this is not you responded rudely. This is you interrupted and said that was a stupid idea. Then we talk about impact. This is the outcome. This is what concerns me. This is what happened because of your behavior and how it relates to your expectations. Then we get very, very clear on the expectation, and this is where I double check and make sure that when I'm talking to somebody about what I expect, that it's something that is fair for their level. So I might say that I expect somebody at your level to set the example for how we run a meeting and how we collaborate with each other. And then here's the piece that I think is missing, which is assistance. How can I help you? How can I take an active role in your development? How can I have skin in the game? Is there something that I can do when you're sort of going off course that we can lock eyes and I can signal to you that you need to get back in line? And then I check myself for bias by running through the same questions. The first thing I ask is, would I give this same feedback to somebody of a different gender or a different race, etc.? So if I'm going to tell a woman that she needs to be more aggressive in a meeting, I think, would I say that to a man? I don't think I would use that word. And so then I won't say it to her. I ask myself, am I asking someone to be someone that they're not? So if I have a team full of extroverts and I have one introvert, is it fair of me to ask this person to follow the same style that the team does in meetings and interrupt? I don't think that's very fair. That might actually be feedback for me that I need to run my meetings better. Erica talked about this too. Have I made a statement about who someone is or who they tend to be? This is called a personality penalty. Many of you might be familiar with Kieran Snyder. She's the founder of Text.io. She does a lot of linguistics research. And she looked at a bunch of performance review feedback, and she found that while men and women both get critical feedback, men's feedback is heavily geared towards suggestions on how to improve, and women's feedback tends to be full of these personality penalties about who she is. She's abrasive. She's judgmental. She needs to watch her tone. And then finally, I think about what feedback should I be giving others too? So it might be valid for me to say that somebody needs to be more vocal in a meeting. But it might also be valid for me to tell everyone else in the room to shut up every once in a while. It might be something where I want to go to the tech lead and say, you need to pay attention to who's not contributing in this meeting and call on them and ask them what they think. And so I rarely give feedback just to one person. Usually if I'm giving constructive feedback to someone, I'm also giving feedback to other members of the team. So I do want to talk about what happens when we get biased feedback from others. Like I said, I see personality penalties all over the place when I'm getting peer feedback for people. And sometimes we have to relay this feedback. And of course, we should be educating people on how to give unbiased feedback. That's really important. But biases are pervasive, and they're going to happen. And our job is to filter this feedback and turn it into something that's valuable. So this is an engineer. We all know this type of engineer. They're grumpy. They're intimidating. They lash out when you don't meet their impossibly high standards. And this was also me at some point, because when I started working, I worked with a lot of men like this. And at some point, my boss sat me down and wanted to give me some feedback, and he told me, Jill, you will catch more flies with honey. And I was so offended. I said, "Are you asking me to be sweet?" And I said, "Are you asking all of the other men on my team to do this as well?" He said he was, but I don't know how much I believe that. But the thing is, this actually sparked a really valuable discussion, where not only did I get to educate him about why that phrasing was pretty problematic, but he also talked to me about why perception is important and why it's sometimes not fair that perception matters more for me than it does for the man that I sit next to. And that is something that I've kind of carried with me. I can make a choice whether I want to hear this feedback or not, but it is something that I want to talk about. And these are the types of conversations that we should be having when we're giving feedback. So, to recap on feedback, give feedback, especially when it's hard. Structure your feedback for consistency. Check yourself for biases. And filter and contextualize any feedback that you hear from peers. Okay, so we talked about safety, talked about feedback, and we've talked about how these things are not simple, right? They take work. And you might think that's enough. So if I'm safe at work, I'm free to be myself, I'm getting fair feedback on my work, then that's great, right? Everything should just sort of take care of itself, my work can speak for itself, and I'll advance based on my ability to execute. This, of course, is known as the meritocracy. A lot of you might be familiar with the idea that the meritocracy is a lie. We're not going to get totally into that, but I do want to focus on whether I, as a woman, am given the opportunity to even prove my merit in the first place. So, how many people are familiar with the 70-20-10 rule? A couple people. Okay. So, 70-20-10 rule is not necessarily rooted in solid research, from what I can find, but it is something that a lot of successful companies follow. So, this rule says that in order for somebody to advance, 70% of their development comes from stretch assignments, things that push us outside of our comfort zone, things that create on-the-job learning. 20% comes from our personal interactions. So this would be interactions with a mentor. This is somebody who's giving you advice, or a sponsor, which is somebody who's advocating for you to advance. And then 10% comes from what's called classroom learning. So that might be books that you read, it might be coming to the lead developer conference, it might be going to a workshop. So 70 is a big number, and that's really where we want to focus. But the problem is that stretch assignments are not getting assigned fairly. This is from the National Center for Women in Tech report from last year. And from this study, we see that women see themselves getting pushed into what are called execution roles. And they're not being given access to what's called the creator role. This is where the creative and innovative work happens that really creates stretches. And it's not that women aren't asking for this work. According to the McKinsey study, more women than men ask for new assignments, ask for promotions, ask for raises. By the way, men tend to get them more often than women, despite the fact that women ask for them more often. Of the people who do ask, women are more often seen as bossy, intimidating, aggressive. In yet another study, 77% of Black women reported having to prove themselves over and over again at work. If you have to prove yourself over and over again at work, you're not getting stretch assignments. So we have these groups of people who are not getting stretch assignments, and in fact are getting penalized when they ask for them. So what can we do? This is where that 20% becomes super critical for underrepresented people. We need sponsors who make it their job to level people up. And so, leveling up others is your job. It's your manager's job, it's your tech lead's job, it's everybody's job. Even the junior team members on my team are tasked with leveling up interns or their peers. They must learn how to delegate work, how to free themselves up to tackle things that are more difficult. And this might seem obvious if you're a manager, because of course, promos and feedback are part of our job, but we have to start seeing it as our responsibility to level up people who are not like us. So let's first talk a little bit about what sponsorship is. Sponsorship is advocating for people, deserving people, to get access to high visibility and high profile assignments. It means throwing your weight behind their promotions. It means speaking their name when they're not in the room or when they're not in conversations that you have access to as a leader. So this comes from the Women in Tech report. The study that this is pulled from also said that men are 45% more likely to be sponsored than women. And this is because we naturally look for protégés who remind us of ourselves. It's not sinister, it's just how it is. And as you can see, sponsorship has a real effect on how women feel about their advancement and whether they stay in the workplace. So I want to just briefly talk about how I sponsor. The first thing I do is when I hear of a team that needs staffing or a project that needs a lead, my mind first goes to the under-indexed folks in my org. And this doesn't mean that I don't mention the other deserving engineers. Of course I do. But it means that I'm always actively and intentionally thinking about the people who are the least likely to have sponsors. I also proactively tell others about the work that my protégés are interested in. So for example, I went through a career planning exercise with a woman on my team and found out that she's interested in a particular piece of work that will likely come up for us in the future. At that point, I told my boss, I told my peers, I told my architect, I told my HR business partner, and anytime I hear even a whisper of this work coming up, I say her name. I want that to be the first thing that people think about when this team actually does come up. And it doesn't have to be something as large as forming a new team or leading a project. It can be an endorsement. If somebody says that they need help wrangling raccoons, then I'm going to say, I know somebody who's great at wrangling raccoons. Kate is great at that. You should talk to her. She could probably help. That's an endorsement that carries weight coming from you as a leader. And finally, I will often identify people on my team who I want to level up, and I'll choose a senior person on the team and I'll say, I really want to get this person to the next level. What is it going to take? What do we have to have them work on? Can you hold one-on-ones with them? Can you help me find the work assignments for them? And that's an expectation that I have for them, and it's something that we check in on a regular basis. So to sum up advocacy, this one is pretty short. Sponsor people who are not like you. Do so intentionally, and hold your team members accountable for sponsoring others as well. And the last thing that I want to say is that you should go watch Janice Fraser's talk from Calibrate last year, titled Female Career Advancement Summed Up in One Usable Diagram. It's full of facts, it's full of studies. A lot of it is kind of what I covered today, but I think it's even more useful. It's only about a half an hour long, so I really encourage you to check it out. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Girl, run the world.